I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Leatha Hopperdietzel. Leatha is a special education teacher in the RVA, as well as a regional event coordinator for the Marshfield area. She has 13 years of teaching experience. In addition to being a full-time teacher, Leatha has another important credential. She has been a home mentor for the past 7 years. Since Leatha was in the 3rd grade, she has dreamt of being a teacher and considers herself to have the best of both worlds, being able to teach her children at home, as well as continuing her passion of forming relationships with the family she works with, as well as encouraging her students to grow in their learning, even in their most difficult areas. She and her husband have 3 children. Leatha's dual roles of teacher and home mentor in the RVA provide her with a rare perspective that will enhance the delivery of this important topic. I want to thank you so much for all your hard work and bring this presentation to us tonight. Welcome, and let's get started.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Thanks everyone for joining tonight. This is such a great opportunity. I absolutely love the thought of these mentor series and how much we can connect and reach out and collaborate with staff, with outside resources that we have available to us, and most importantly with each other as home mentors. So thanks for joining me tonight. I am going to be working off of 2 screens, and we're going to get started learning about learning styles. As a home mentor and as a teacher, I have really enjoyed, again, as Tracy indicated, having the best of both worlds and being able to teach alongside other families, but also be a teacher to my own children as well. So, oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. The idea of teaching styles really kind of comes at a perfect time in the school year. This is a time in the school year where, as parents, maybe we can reflect a little bit on how our year went, you know, how our child maybe learned at home with us, you know, was the curriculum a good fit? And it also gives us a chance to kind of look at other ways that we might want to switch things up for next year. So really, I feel that the timing of this is really fitting with what we may change over the summer or change next year for our children. I also want you to be kind of a vital participant in this presentation tonight. So feel free to use the chat box. Feel free to ask questions as we go. If I talk learning strategies that work well for your child, go ahead and put that in the chat box. If you know of other techniques that you also use that work well for you when we're talking about a particular style, go ahead and talk about that as well and share those ideas with each other. As we know, curriculums never are truly 100% perfect fit for our child. So no matter what, we're always going to have to adapt and change things up a little bit. But if we have an understanding of our child's learning style, that may give us an advantage on how we can really tailor and teach our child and how they can communicate what they've learned back to us. So let's go ahead and let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about with learning styles is that different students or different children have different approaches to how they process information. This is called their preferred learning mode. This is the way in which a student absorbs, the way that they process, the way that they comprehend, and how they retain information. There are no boundaries. Our world is multimodal, so information is presented in so many different ways. And each learning style uses a different part of the brain. The more of the brain that we use during learning, the more of what a child is able to retain and remember. They're able to kind of make those connections a little bit more. And if we're able to teach to a child's learning style, that really is going to have a significant influence on their motivation and on their behavior. Thus, we're then able to provide those learning strategies appropriately as well. And also, we should see a child's comprehension and retention and motivation, as well as their own understanding of their thought process, if we're able to teach more to their learning style. every student learns differently, right? Otherwise, our jobs as home mentors and as teachers would be pretty easy. It's important for us to understand the differences in our child's learning style. You may have found yourself, like me perhaps, as a teacher of my own children, often wondering why my child's not catching on the way that I did at that age, or why they're not interested in something that I feel that they should be. Well, that's because they're processing and they're distinguishing information differently than what we have because they have their own learning style. We have our own likes, and we certainly have things that we don't like, and our children are the same way. If you think about your own schooling experience, perhaps there were teachers or subject areas that you really, really liked, and then you knew for sure which subjects you didn't like. And if you really think about that, you may see a pattern in the type of teaching style that was used in those classes or for those subjects. And perhaps those classes were taught to more of your learning style. If we think about our own children, that maybe we can allow them some extra leeway in how they learn and use some of the learning strategies that we're going to learn tonight and really utilize that to our advantage and help predict how our child might react or act in certain situations within their learning environment. And last, we want to make sure that we can implement practice strategies into the daily activities, curriculum, and assessments that we're using. So it's important for us to help us capitalize on what works for our child. Help them to utilize the patterns and learning styles towards a greater capacity to learn and remember. So some students are going to have a dominant style of learning. Really, there's no right mix at all, nor are these styles going to be fixed. And as your child grows, you're going to see that learning style change. Overall, if we look at the type of curriculum that we use or how we teach different subjects, and we can adapt that a little bit more to our child's learning style, it's going to be more beneficial for them. It may increase their academic confidence. It may motivate them a little bit more to want to try or to explore and expand their learning all on their own. If you're like me, I have caught myself teaching my own children my own learning style, and it didn't work for them because we don't share the same teaching style. I learned early on with my daughter that we do not have the same learning style at all. This was many years ago when Bookshark just came out, and I was intrigued and fascinated with history and the literature-based curriculum, and thought this was going to be wonderful working with my daughter on this so we could read books together. And lo and behold, it was a curriculum that was not taught to her learning style. My daughter's a very kinesthetic learner. She needs to be moving, and for her to sit and listen to stories was horrible, at least for her. So we made it through the year, but I really had to think out the box and adapt the curriculum and the books that we were reading to better meet her learning needs. Watch your children. They really do give you clues to what they want and their interest. If you think about the differences in how children learn, you are really observing what brings you closer to understanding their unique gifts. And it's really going to reveal more effective ways. As I go through each one, I want you to kind of take note about which learning style seems to sort of be a better fit for your child. Think back to this past school year. More of what I would say the boxes are checked, sort of more of a dominant learning style for them. Now keep in mind that these learning styles are going to grow and change. And towards the end of our session tonight, we will provide you with a quick reference sheet. This will list styles with suggested activities activities. So you can kind of take a look at that and use that as you continue to work with your children. The first learning style I'm going to go over are our visual learners. So our visual learners, they basically use graphics to represent what could have been presented in words. They will use anything with maps and graphic organizers to access and understand new information. Again, they're visual learners, so they have to visually see what things look like. That means that a visual learner, if your child is more of a visual learner, they're going to gravitate more towards pictures, videos, and posters, not only to learn information, but to display the information that they are learning. They're going to use more of the white space. They want to use maps and visually plan out objects. If you have a visual learner in your house, you may notice that they like to draw and doodle often. They really have good imaginations. They may have recognized words by sight. It's something that just comes natural for them and easy for them as well. You may notice that if your child's a visual learner, they're going to be using many colors. In fact, art may be their favorite subject. You may notice that they naturally underline or highlight important information. Again, these are things that if your child's a visual learner, you may notice them doing. They can easily visualize objects, plans, and outcomes. If you're decorating something, they can kind of see beyond the picture that's in front of them because they can visualize what that outcome already looks like. If you're not a visual learner, you might notice and struggle with that just a little bit more. Learners are going to be able to visualize objects and plans and outcomes. They're also going to have a good spatial sense. They have an amazing sense of direction. They're going to be able to use maps, and they're rarely going to get lost. So if you were to get out of an elevator, they just instinctively know which way to turn. They are able to work from lists and written directions really, really well. If you have a child that's a visual learner, you're going to be able to notice that they can complete a task after it's shown. Maybe they just need to watch someone do it the first time. You may notice that they write things down to see if it looks right. Maybe a spelling word. If they're trying to figure out how to spell something, they might trace it out on paper to actually see what it looks like. Maybe if they are trying to remember a phone number, they would actually kind of pretend to dial it out as you typically would. A visual learner may typically remember faces, but they're going to forget names. And because they're a visual learner, they might say things like, "Show me." Now remember, things in their visual world, they're picking up on everything that they see. So they may be distracted more by movement or action that's in the classroom. So these would be some different areas that would show us that our child is more of a visual learner. Feel free to let me know if you see anything in here that might lean you more towards your child being a visual learner. Otherwise, let's look at auditory learners. So these are learners that prefer things that are heard or spoken. So they transfer that information through listening. They need to hear that. So that spoken word doesn't necessarily always to come through other people, right? So yes, they're going to listen, but at the same time, their speaking allows them another opportunity and another chance to hear things. So they are really good at listening, and they're really good at speaking and hearing, again, what they need to say. You may also notice that if you have a child that is an auditory learner, they use repetition as a study technique. Again, they may need to say it themselves. And again, it's an opportunity for them to hear themselves say it, and they're repeating that information. They may use mnemonic devices to memorize information. So mnemonic devices are devices that or techniques that a student can use that essentially helps them to remember information. It's essentially a shortcut. If you're a piano player, we know that the treble clef has the notes of G, E, G, B, D, and F. An easy way to remember that is every good boy does fine. Or maybe they're going to use the technique of rhyme, such as saying 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? Chunking information, like maybe a phone number is another mnemonic device. Our phone number is 10 digits long and it's broken down into 3 chunks. If a student is an auditory learner, you may notice if they are saying a phone number, they're going to say it over and over and over again in order for them to remember it. Auditory learners, they prefer to have things explained. They may ask a lot of questions and may ask for directions or talk to themselves. You may notice that auditory learners are not trying to be cumbersome or annoying through some of these conversations, but they may say again what has already been said, or they may ask an obvious or previously answered question. Again, it's not, again, they're trying to be annoying. They're trying to hear and say that information that's already been said. What they're basically doing is they are speaking first rather than sorting out their ideas and then speaking. They are trying to process that information by saying it aloud. They are distracted by noise. It needs to be quiet in order to work. They might like using sound or music. In fact, music may be their favorite class. Generally, auditory learners are going to be those kids that remember all the words to every song that they hear. They may also remember names but forget faces. They're able to perform tasks just after listening to instructions. And auditory learners might be students that say, "Tell me," or "Let's talk it over." We are next going to move into our read and write learners. So our read and write learners, their preference for information is going to be emphasized on the text-based input. So the information that they are receiving through text and reading, but also the output of that information. So they're going to be reading it and writing it in all forms. And I'll just make sure that this is coming up for us. There we go. So typically, you have a student that is going to have more of a read and write learning style. Like I said, they're going to learn best through words using that visual text. They are going to be kiddos that love taking notes. In fact, they will also be very avid readers. They love being able to write well and read widely. They find that it just comes very natural for them. They're able to take very abstract concepts and put it into words and essays quite easily. They also are kiddos that love learning, and in fact, they will seek out places and information where they can learn. So looking in dictionaries, thesauruses, glossaries. They're going to be searching the internet, putting together PowerPoint presentations to share that information. They also have diaries. Read and write learners also like to play on the meaning or sounds of words. So these are typically going to be students that like tongue twisters. They like rhymes. They like special poems like limericks. They also know the meaning of many words, and they're always going to make an effort to find the meaning of new words and vocabulary and share that with others. So these are our read and write learners. If by chance you have anyone in your house that might fit this learning style. And we save the best for last, our kinesthetic learners. This is the most common learning style for students. My daughter's included in one of these. These students learn the information best through tactile representations of information. It has to be the concrete things. They are hands-on learners. They learn best by figuring things out by hands, and they use all of their senses. So they prefer using their own experiences and things that are real, even when they're shown in pictures or on screens. So these learners kind of gravitate towards demonstrations, simulations, videos or movies of real things. using all of their senses. So they're going to be looking for things that they can see, that they can touch, taste, smell, and hear. It really helps them to connect to reality and their own personal experience. And that's how they make those connections. And then they can turn around and retain that information and share that with others. They use their body and sense of touch to learn in the world around them. They love to get dirty and make models of things. They also like to learn by trial and error. These kiddos learn as they go. They generally will not look at the instructions first. They just want to jump right in and figure out parts of something as soon as possible. They may want to tear apart an engine and put them together and figure that out. They may also learn best through field trips. Again, being able to make those personal connections. You know, if a student is struggling with history, right, that's an text-based material for them. They may struggle understanding and grasping that. But if we were to take that same student and take him to Pennsylvania, walk him through the battlegrounds, or to DC to see some of the memorials, he is going to make an emotional and personal connection to that trip and to history, and you've just made it come alive for him. So attaching those emotions and connections through field trips and events. Kinesthetic learners also have collections and exhibits of things, and these materials that they collect have personal meaning to them. And of course, these students need to move. They constantly are fidgeting. They're always on the go. They may act as if they're using the motor to go 24/7 as soon as their feet hit the floor in the morning. Gym class may be their favorite subject. Josh, I can totally relate with you. Sometimes these kiddos are known as being very hyper, right? They can't sit for very long. They have to get up and move around. One thing you might notice if you have a kinesthetic learner is that they process information on the move, right? So whereas if we're struggling with something, we may sit and kind of think about it. These types of learners have to be up and about. Maybe they're out exercising, running around. That's the way that they process information and think about it. They just like to be active. These types of learners also notice and appreciate textures. They're more sensitive to the physical world. So this also means, though, that while they may appreciate different textures, it may also be kind of more of a sensory issue with them, meaning that they notice tags on clothes or other textures of clothing as well. They may use hand gestures and body language when they're trying to communicate. So really, they really try to use whole body when they're communicating because that's how they are taking in information. So ultimately, that's how they're going to share that information as well. These kiddos dislike sitting and listening to someone talk or lecture. Marcia, I can totally relate with you. This is why, as much as I wanted Bookshark to work for my daughter, it didn't, because it was too much of sitting and reading. And I had to be okay with that, right? We found a different curriculum that worked for her next year, and we went with it, and she is thriving and loving it. It's just hard for us sometimes to relate, because that's how we expect learning to occur, is through sitting. And that always doesn't need to be done that way. And they also, like I said, have trouble concentrating when they're sitting. They may use the words, "let me try," or "how do you feel?" Charlone, that's a great question. So we switched to Calvert, and this was many years ago, and that really seems to work well from her. So having different worksheets, different books, things that she can have in her hand, it just right now seems to be working great for her. And with kids, we kind of take it year by year as well. And Marcia, does that seem to work well for you too, having Calvert? Yeah, you know, I do find that a curriculum is never going to be 100% perfect, and we have to adapt things a little bit and go. But, you know, as I was putting together this presentation and talking about strategies, there were even some strategies that I was putting down where I found myself thinking, you know what? I should be doing a little bit more of this. So maybe some strategies that we talk about might also help. Definitely. And, you know, that's really the fun thing with the RVA is having the ability for us as home mentors and working with our children and, you know, sometimes knowing them best and their learning styles, to talk with the staff about, you know, opting out some other curriculum or switching things around a little bit. That's really, really neat because we have an advantage to really teach our children to the learning styles or to what we feel them needing. We might have some other things for you as well that might work in talking about some strategies. Then when we take a look and think about, okay, maybe there was a learning style that we just went over of the 4 that seemed to kind of be a little bit more dominant, or maybe as we were going through it, you were making some mental checks of, yep, that's my child, yep, this one too, and maybe there was a learning style that seemed to have a little bit more checks than the other learning styles. Like I said, you could have a multimodal learner where they are using 2 or more methods to learn information, or maybe you might have a child that just has one way that they learn. You know, when we think about that information and their preferred learning style, really, it is kind of best practice to try to teach the most difficult lesson using your child's preferred learning style. Okay, that's the one where they're going to make the most connections. So you want to pair that with the most difficult subject area. Beyond that, then, you really want to try to reinforce using multiple learning styles. We have to help our children be able to improve and adapt to other learning skills and other learning styles that they're not as comfortable with, right? Because ultimately, we live in a world where how one learns often means nothing and only the ability to learn has value. So we have to try to teach them how to be successful within our world. We also have to help our children to see their true abilities and areas and strategies that they need to incorporate. So essentially, we're teaching them how to advocate for themselves. My one son that I'm working with, he is very much a visual learner. You know, I kind of chuckle because when we take a spelling test, I know exactly within usually 4 or 5 words when he has not used the learning strategy that works for him in spelling his words. And I can look at him and say, you didn't write out your spelling words, did you? And, you know, he'll typically say no. And I'm like, wow, buddy, this is how you learn best. You are a visual learner. You have to spell out those words. You have to see them or use note cards and reviewing those often. I'm trying to teach my son about the strategies that we're using that work well for him to encourage him to gravitate towards those and also advocate for what he needs. If he's not understanding something, to tell me and let's work together on how we can best help them. I agree, Josh, yes. Uploading information, helping them to see that there's more beyond just what they're able to learn and grasp. And we can, you know, as parents and having our children at home, we have that unique advantage. We can really hone in on our child's weaknesses and strengthen the areas that come really easy for them. We can pretty much adapt that to whatever they need. The other thing that was really invaluable for me, especially starting out in the RVA, was having the RVA teachers readily available as I needed them. If I, know of a specific way that my child's learning, I can let them know and say, hey, my child's more of a visual learner. We're struggling with this. What are some resources you have? What are some strategies or techniques? The other thing that also really helped me that I would encourage other RVA parents to do, or learning guides or home mentors, is to seek out other families. I remember clearly the first few field trips that we attended and where I started to make connections with other families. And I could say, hey, how's your day going? And it's a great place for us to connect, collaborate with others. It helps you to know that you're not alone, right? We have really good days and then we have days that don't go so well. Maybe other families are experiencing the same thing. We can share ideas, we can share strategies and techniques. And that's really how I have built up my toolbox of just tips and strategies that I can incorporate. Or I know my go-to moms that I can ask questions about what else I can do. Yes, definitely. Have those conversations with teachers. Talk about, this is what I'm noticing. Can you help me out? Collaboration ultimately is really, really key. We never want you to feel like you're alone. And really seek out, that's what we would want a child to do. Seek out help. Well, we have to do the same thing. If we are feeling like a learning style is just not, what we can work through, or we're just struggling in learning how to make that connection because it's not our learning style, then seek out that assistance. So the next few slides that I have for you are strategies that are listed in the 4 different learning styles that we just went over. You're going to see that there are some strategies that are more universal, but ultimately they see the same learning outcome. It just kind of depends on the learning style. They're in no particular order, and like I mentioned before, I do have a reference sheet that lists out many more strategies that you will have access to. And as we're going through these, if you know of other tricks or strategies that work, go ahead and put them in the chat box, because again, it's another opportunity for us to share some ideas and strategies that really work well for us and to share that with others. First, we're going to go over visual strategies. So remember, these are students that need to see things in order to learn well. So they're going to be using those images and maps and pictures or other visual media to help them learn. And they are going to be replacing these visual maps or pictures in place of that text. It's important also that we consider those movement distractions that we really need to try to avoid during that study time so they are able to focus. We want to allow them the ability to highlight important key terms in corresponding color. So using that color really helps to highlight major details. Some of the other strategies that also work well for those students that are visual learner, like we said with the different colors, to allow students to kind of create a pattern. Remember, it's all about that visual representation of what you want them to learn. Remind your child to draw their pages from memory. So it's all about visualization. I'm a very visual learner, so I can clearly remember when I had to study for exams in college, I memorized the pages. I mean, I could literally verbatim tell you what was on that page and where it was located because I was visualizing those in my head and drawing on memory. You can have your students write out their spelling words, write out checklists, formulas, write out and use flashcards, kind of move those flashcards around. You can write out materials on slips of paper and move them around in proper sequence, anything to help create more of that visual pattern. Using those flashcards to review information. It works in our household, Josh. Look at the page, again, looking for those patterns, recalling the pictures. Replace important words with symbols or initials. If you have ever learned vocabulary, incorporating some sort of a symbol or a picture to go with it really helps you to remember and retain that information. Again, using those checklists is really important. We want to try to use different colored pens or different fonts. Again, it's all about creating those visuals and that pattern. Use lots of visual media. I like to think of trying to incorporate stories in like a visual journey, right? It helps students to memorize information that isn't easy to see. Talk about that. So lots of good visual strategies for more of our visual learners. Yes, very much, Tracy. A dry erase board, colored markers, using lots of different colors. And some of these things, if you have more of a visual learner at your home, some of these things maybe you haven't tried. These would be kind of neat to go ahead and experiment with them. Hey, let's try highlighting some important keywords that we have in. Let's see what we can do to make that more of a visualization for them. Next, we're going to move into our auditory strategies. So if you have a child that is more of an auditory learner, remember that they need to hear things, not just see them in order to learn well. Some things with auditory learners is that it's best for them to record notes and to listen to them on tape. So because their learning preference or their learning style is to hear things, they're not going to be good note takers. And you're going to see down here, utilizing speech to text for notes. So that's something that would be really beneficial for them. Allowing them to use flashcards and read the notes aloud. Remember, it's about them hearing that information again. So whether someone's reading it to them, they're listening to recording, or they're saying it out loud to themselves is really helpful, and it helps them to stay engaged with the material that they're learning. Using audiobooks or reading aloud to them works well. Give them opportunities to talk it out. Use discussions to expand upon the understanding of a topic. Have your child explain notes with peers, FaceTime. Share that information with fellow learners. Question your child before an upcoming test or question them about the material. Maybe have your son or daughter provide you with a girl summary of what they've learned for that day. Again, it's one more opportunity for them to say the information, hear it, and make that connection that will help them to recall that information later. Yes, that's perfect, Marcia. It is so neat to see strategies that work well. We need to make sure that they're spending time in those quiet places so they can recall that information. Again, give them opportunities to reread their notes or assignments out loud. Again, giving them the opportunity to repeat that information. Maybe if they're struggling with spelling words, have them spell those words out loud. Have them record themselves spelling that out loud as well. Again, answer questions out loud. Having those oral discussions works better for them than writing that information down. And then the other thing too here is putting material to a tune or a rhythm and rehearse it. They can just kind of, again, make that connection. They're connecting it with the music, maybe, right? Because these types of kiddos that are more of auditory learners like that music, so you can really have some fun with that. Mnemonics are also friends of auditory learners, so come up with little shortcuts and tricks to help them remember information. And again, if you have other strategies, feel free to put them in the chat box. Yes, speaking processes out loud. Say, show me, what do you mean? Or you could even have your child teach you as well. Again, they're saying the information, but they're hearing it out loud, and you're able to provide them feedback based on the information they provide you. Such great ideas. It really gets you excited about some new possibilities of things that you can implement. And last, here with our read and write strategies. So remember, if we have a child that's more of a read and write learner, they're going to be looking for more ways to incorporate speaking and reading and writing with anything that they're learning. So these students are not going to have any issue with having to write and rewrite words and notes. In fact, they may do this on their own already. This is the way that works for them in learning that information. Using role playing as often as possible. Anytime you can turn it into more of a theatrical performance really works well for them. Oh, Marcia, that's wonderful. That is such a great idea. Using and talking in her phone, to her phone in articles and going back to answer those questions. That's fantastic. What a great idea. With our read and write strategies, again, participate in that public speaking. Debating, writing, and journalism are wonderful ways to incorporate their type of learning into the direct content that they are learning and sharing with others. Organizing their information in diagrams and charts and graphic organizers, and then taking that information and writing them into statements. Remember, our read and write strategy learners, or read and write learners, you like the strategies of being able to read information and write it, and it comes easy for them. So while you may be looking at and thinking, oh, this wouldn't work well for my child, well, is he or she a read and write learner, or is perhaps your child more, does he have more of a dominant area in another learning strategy? I know my child would struggle in being able to write out information. It just doesn't naturally. It's just not the way that he learns. So this is a strategy that wouldn't work for him. But for those learners that are more engaged with anything reading and anything writing related, and they love that, these are things that are going to come easy for him or her. Allow them to talk through procedures, use recordings of what they've learned. That helps them with the repetition. And then, again, they're not going to mind rereading their notes again and again, because that's something that they naturally do. And here is where we add in more of the dramatic presence, allowing them to read content aloud, make it dramatic and varied, turn it into an energetic speech, use role-playing, work with others. These are great strategies that really work well for those read and write learners. And last but not least, we saved our fun kinesthetic learners for the very end. Remember, these kiddos need to do things in order to understand. They are little busybodies. So some strategies that really work well for their learning styles are using those concrete examples. Using real-life applications helps them to add to their notes. It helps them to add to their understandings as well. Giving them anything that they can touch, that hands-on movement. You know, using a computer really does help to reinforce the learning because they're using that through sense of touch. So don't stay away from the computers. Incorporate that into your everyday learning. Give them opportunities to trace their spelling words. Use flashcards. If you write spelling words on a note card, they can say the word and trace it with their finger, or they can write it in the sky. Using flashcards, again, helps them to memorize information because they're touching the cards, they're moving them around. Any type of movement make it more concrete for them. Remember, helping them to recall a field trip, those visualizations, helping them to think about how did you feel when you were there? What did you do? Help them to kind of relive that experience again. Allowing them to role play, to practice their skills and behaviors. The role playing really helps students to move objects around. Maybe they can use Legos to help them, but essentially helps them to dramatize a concept or act out a concept of themselves. This really helps these types of learners to practice skills and behaviors. Redo lab experiments or projects. These types of learners would love to redo those experiments again. It just is something that is very hands-on, and they'll do it again, and it will make learning more concrete for them, and they'll make more connections and retain that information. Don't neglect writing and drawing, right? These are physical activities. In fact, if you're doing writing and drawing activities, use big sheets of paper. Get more action from drawing because they have to cover the whole sheet. Use physical objects as much as possible. Again, those concrete items, allowing them to physically touch things as they learned. Most of all, we need to allow for body movement. This is so important for those kiddos. And sometimes, especially because I have a kinesthetic learner in my house, it's difficult for me to understand. You know, it's okay for them to have to snap fingers or pace. Or maybe if they're reciting material, they're mouthing that. Just not saying it out loud. Again, it's giving them movement. Perhaps giving them gum to chew, allowing them to walk around or rock in a chair while reading and studying. You know, I found that it's important that, yes, a child is moved, but you have to show them the places where it may be more appropriate to do this. Again, this is about teaching your child which strategies work for them and maybe the more appropriate places to use these types of strategies. Maybe your kiddo just needs to shake a foot or hold on to maybe like a fidget item, sit on an exercise ball. It's also really important that, yes, they need movement, but sometimes they need to be taught how to use breathing and relaxation techniques. How you can help them to stay calm, centered, relaxed, and aware of their body is really, really helpful. You are right, Tracy. They're all about spelling. Some of that Calvert spelling as well. Some hands-on activities are in there. Using, those little letter tiles, moving them around is great movement activities for them. Our kinesthetic learners also love using checklists. We talked about flashcards. These are great ways for them to check off things, kind of giving them a little to-do list to do back and forth. That just doesn't need to be at the table. It can be on the other side of the room. Giving your child an opportunity to get up and move in between some lessons when they need a break. Make sure you are. The other thing I was going to say with our kinesthetic learners is to make sure that you're utilizing pictures and photographs to illustrate your ideas. Allow your children to see those diagrams on paper. Then also it's important to take frequent but not long breaks. You may notice that if your child has a long break, it's harder to get them to come back to the tasks. So take frequent but not long breaks, and then use some of that textured paper with different size pencils and papers and crayons. Again, different textured paper like sandpaper, things that they could be touching. Anytime you are incorporating those senses, you're allowing for those connections to be made and for the ability or for your child to be able to retain that information and make those connections when they then share that information with others. So those are some strategies for our kinesthetic learners. Yeah, so many differences. What a unique opportunity we have, as home mentors, to be able to help our children and for us to be able to kind of figure them out and just learn best and strategies and ways that we can incorporate how they learn best and how we can teach them about those learning styles as well. Advocacy, I really think, is key, especially as that child's getting older. So what I have put together is a quick reference sheet that we will send out to you. Again, the top of each of these sheets basically has check boxes, allowing you to kind of simply place a check to see if there are learning styles that are more dominant for your child, or maybe, like I said, they're multimodal, meaning that they kind of fall into all of them. It just really comes down to the content that they're learning. And then beneath each of those learning style preferences are going to be learning strategies. Just some little strategies that you might be able to incorporate. It might give you some additional ideas when you're working on some concepts that might be a little bit more challenging. Take a look at this. Add to these lists as you reach out to other families and other teachers as well. Thank you so much for allowing me to have some time tonight. I apologize for the connection issues that we had with our internet, but we are able to be on time here, and I want to share some time here at the end and give you some time to ask questions. We have some home mentors in here as well, so if you have specific questions or strategies that you'd like to share, again, taking that time to talk with others and collaborate is really beneficial. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I'm going to say with the auditory learning, and this is kind of, and it just kind of clicks with me because, in teaching math, math teachers oftentimes are like, okay, we're going to subtract x from both sides, now divide by 2, and they're saying it out loud because they're walking the class or walking their students through it. Well, when I look at the students doing it, they're quiet and they're you know, showing their work on their pencil and paper. But so what I started doing was just with someone who's struggling with math and say algebra 1, you know, it's algebra properties, and I'm like, just speak it out loud what you're doing, and they'll speak it out loud, and they're like, that kind of feels weird. And I'm like, yeah, but it's going to help you remember it. And they're like, well, I can't do that during the test or something like that, you know. And I'll be like, well, then you can kind of whisper it, or you can move your lips to it. So like even that auditory, that kinesthetic, it's like you're downloading that information. So you know, encouraging kids in math when they're working on algebra or getting a common denominator or a long division is actually speaking it out loud as if they were teaching it to the whole mentor, and that really seems to help. And I think you nailed it with the auditory and even kinesthetic in that case, because you're going through those motions, and the more ways you can upload information to the brain, it's like I think of like USB ports, like in each ear, up at the nostrils, in the eyeballs. You know what I mean? It's like uploading into the brain however many ways. The more USB ports, the better, you know. So that was really cool. Thank you, Leatha.
Definitely, yes. The more ways that you can tap into the brain and how the information is processed, the easier it's going to be to retain and remember and share that information. Great example, Josh. Well, feel free to stick around if you have any other questions. Otherwise, Tracy and Josh, thanks for giving me the opportunity to hang out with you all tonight and to share with you some information on learning styles and additional strategies. And like I said, reach out to other families, reach out to staff members, allow us to work with you and to help you find, you know, more of a learning style that your child prefers, and allow us to come up with some resources or other strategies that might work well for you. And definitely have those conversations, especially at this time of the year when we're talking about curriculum. You know, if it's a year that you struggled a little bit, or your child seemed to struggle in remembering the information, you know, go ahead and talk about that. Talk about maybe more of a preferred learning style, and if there's a curriculum that might be a better fit. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Leatha.